I didn't mean to fall in love with her. That's how these stories usually start, don't they? Someone stumbles into a moment they never intended to live, but now it's tattooed on their skin, burning and impossible to erase. But there I was, sitting at the dining table in the flickering glow of a single candle, my husband across from me, my lover standing at the door. Her silhouette cut sharply against the amber light of the hallway, a shadow of all the decisions I'd made, bearing the weight of a question that would shatter everything. "Elena," Amber said, her voice low and urgent. She stepped into the room, the creak of the floorboards louder than my breath. "We can't keep doing this. I'm tired of hiding, of pretending I don't want more." Jacob didn't speak. His silence had become an unwelcome companion over the past few months. He'd always been the patient one, the understanding one. When I'd told him about Amber, about the feelings I didn't expect, the connection I couldn't deny, he'd surprised me with his calm. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just a quiet nod and a simple, "I trust you." But trust has limits. Amber's green eyes burned with unshed tears as she looked between the two of us. "You have to decide, Elena. Me or him." The words hung in the air, suffocating. Jacob's hand tightened around his wine glass, the knuckles paling. He didn't look at me, not directly, but I could see the hurt etched into the lines of his face, carved deep and permanent. "I can't choose," I whispered, though the lie tasted bitter on my tongue. I already knew my answer, but saying it aloud felt like a betrayal too sharp to endure. Amber's laugh was brittle, a sound that cracked something inside me. "You've already chosen. You just don't have the guts to admit it." Her words stung, because they were true. I'd always been a coward in love. I wanted everything, wanted her fire, her passion, her ferocity, but I also wanted the safety of Jacob, the life we'd built, the promises we'd made. It was selfish. It was cruel. But it was the truth. "Elena," Jacob's voice was soft but firm, breaking the silence like a thread snapping. "Maybe it's time we ended this." I turned to him, panic flaring in my chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you can't have both." His gaze met mine, steady and heartbreakingly kind. "And I'm tired of pretending it doesn't hurt." Amber stepped forward, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "So am I." It had started 6 months ago, on an unremarkable Tuesday. I was running late for a meeting, clutching a half-empty coffee cup and shuffling through a pile of disorganized notes when Amber walked into my life. She was at the cafe counter, her laughter light and easy, drawing every eye in the room. Mine lingered too long. She turned, catching me staring, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Her green eyes sparkled with curiosity, framed by dark lashes that could cut glass. She was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like standing on the edge of a cliff and daring the wind to push you. "You're spilling your coffee," she said, her voice warm and teasing. I looked down, startled to find the cup tilted precariously in my hand, a dark stain spreading across my notes. "Oh, God, She smiled, a slow, disarming curve of her lips. "Relax. It's just coffee." But it wasn't just coffee. It was the beginning of a firestorm, the spark that would consume me. By the time I realized how far I'd fallen, it was too late to stop the descent. Amber wasn't supposed to matter this much. That was the lie I told myself as I sat across from her during our first meeting. That wasn't an accident. It was another unremarkable afternoon when she texted me, her name lighting up my phone like a neon warning sign. "Lunch?" Just one word. No smiley face, no exclamation point. Crisp. Straightforward. Tempting. I stared at the message for a solid minute before replying. My thumb hesitated over the keyboard, a dozen excuses forming in my head. But I typed back. "Sure." We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where nobody knew your name, but the food was just pretentious enough to feel intimate. She was already there when I arrived, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun, strands framing her face. She looked up and smiled, and for a moment, I forgot why I'd come. "Elena," she said, standing to hug me like we'd done this 100 times before. Her touch lingered, her fingers brushing against my back in a way that made my skin hum. "Amber," I managed, my voice tight. I sat down quickly, putting the table between us as if it could shield me from whatever this was becoming. The conversation flowed easily, too easily. She was funny, sharp, the kind of person who made you feel like you were the only one in the room. By the time the check arrived, my cheeks hurt from smiling. "You're married, aren't you?" she asked suddenly, her tone casual, but her eyes piercing. The question caught me off guard. "Yes." "And he doesn't mind you having lunch with a strange woman?" I laughed nervously. "Jacob's not the jealous type." Her lips curved into a mischievous grin. Lucky me. It was the kind of comment I should have brushed off, the kind of moment where I should have walked away. But I didn't. It didn't take long for Jacob to notice the change in me. He wasn't a fool. He could sense when the rhythm of our life shifted, when I started checking my phone more often, when my excuses became less convincing. "Who's Amber?" he asked one night as we lay in bed, his voice soft but probing. My heart skipped a beat. "Just a friend. A friend you've been seeing a lot of." I turned to face him, the guilt curling in my stomach like smoke. "It's not what you think." He studied me for a long moment, his blue eyes searching mine. "Then tell me what it is." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? How could I admit that this friendship had become the most exciting thing in my life? Jacob sighed and rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. "Elena, I've always trusted you. Don't make me regret it." The first time Amber kissed me, it felt like stepping off a ledge. We were at her apartment, a cozy space filled with books and mismatched furniture that felt more like her than any room I'd ever been in. I'd gone there under the pretense of returning a book she'd lent me, though we both knew it was just an excuse. We were sitting on her couch, the space between us charged with an unspoken tension. She reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, her touch lingering. "I've wanted to do this for weeks," she whispered. I didn't stop her as she leaned in, her lips brushing mine with a softness that took my breath away. For a moment, the world fell away, leaving only her, the warmth of her touch, the taste of her kiss. When she pulled back, her eyes searched mine, waiting for some kind of reaction. All I could do was whisper, "I can't." But even as I said it, I leaned back in, closing the gap between us. Amber brought out a side of me I hadn't seen in years. She was fire and chaos, passion and unpredictability. With her, I felt alive in a way I hadn't since my early 20s. But that fire came at a cost. Jacob's patience, his understanding, was not infinite. He grew quieter as the weeks turned into months, the space between us widening with every late-night text I tried to hide, every lie I told to cover up where I'd been. "You're slipping away from me," he said one night, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to stop it. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him he was wrong. But I couldn't. Because he wasn't. Amber's jealousy started as a simmer, but quickly boiled over. She hated that I went home to Jacob every night, that I still wore my wedding ring, that I refused to let her be more than a secret. "We could be happy, you know," she said one night, her voice laced with frustration. "If you'd just let go of him." "You don't understand," I replied, the words sounding hollow even to me. "Jacob's my husband. He's been there for me through everything." "And I haven't," she shot back, her green eyes flashing. "I've been here, Elena. I've given you everything, and you keep giving me crumbs." "I never promised you anything more," I said, my voice cracking. "You knew what this was." Her laughter was bitter, sharp. "And you knew how this would end." And so it came to this. The three of us in the same room, the air heavy with tension and the weight of a decision I didn't want to make. "You have to choose," Amber said, her voice trembling with anger and desperation. Jacob's silence was deafening, his gaze fixed on me as if trying to decipher the answer before I spoke it. I looked between them, my heart breaking in two. One was safety, stability, a life I'd built and promised to uphold. The other was passion, chaos, and the thrill of something new. But in the end, the choice was never really mine. It had been made the moment I let Amber in, the moment I decided that safety wasn't enough. The silence after Amber left was suffocating. Jacob sat across from me, his face pale, his jaw tight. I wanted to say something, to fill the void with apologies, explanations, anything that might soften the blow. But no words came. Finally, he broke the silence. So, that's it? I blinked, my throat dry. Jacob, You chose me. His voice was flat, drained of emotion. But it doesn't feel like I won. I opened my mouth to protest, but he held up a hand. No, Elena. Let's not pretend. Not now. The weight of his words settled heavily on my chest. He was right, of course. Choosing him hadn't felt like a victory. It had felt like retreating to a life I wasn't sure I deserved anymore. Jacob stood, his movements slow, deliberate. I'm going to bed, he said, his voice hollow. We can talk in the morning. I watched him go, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The days after Amber's departure were eerily quiet. I kept expecting her to call, to show up at my door, demanding an explanation, a second chance. But she didn't. I checked my phone obsessively, my heart skipping every time it buzzed, only to feel a pang of disappointment when it wasn't her. The absence of her presence was louder than any confrontation could have been. It wasn't until a week later that she broke the silence. A single text, devoid of her usual humor or warmth. I hope you're happy. I stared at the words, my chest tightening. I wanted to respond, to tell her that I wasn't happy, that I missed her, that I didn't know how to fix the mess I'd made. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I deleted the message and turned off my phone. Jacob and I tried to return to normal. Or at least, we pretended to. He brought me coffee in the mornings like he always had, though the gestures felt stilted, forced. I kissed his cheek before leaving for work, but the intimacy was gone, replaced by a polite distance neither of us acknowledged. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the tension finally broke. Do you still love her? Jacob asked, his voice quiet but firm. The question hit me like a blow. I hesitated, knowing the wrong answer could shatter whatever fragile thread was holding us together. I don't know. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. I think you do. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I whispered, I love you too. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. That's not how this works, Elena. You can't have it both ways. Weeks passed. Amber was gone, but she lingered in the corners of my mind, a ghost of what could have been. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding the routines of my marriage, but nothing felt the same. One afternoon, as I sorted through the mail, I found a letter. My breath hitched when I saw Amber's handwriting on the envelope. I waited until I was alone to open it, my hands trembling. The letter was short, just a few lines, but each word cut deeper than the last. Elena. I hope you find what you're looking for. I can't keep holding on to someone who isn't mine. Goodbye. Amber. Tears blurred my vision as I read the words over and over. The finality of it hit me like a tidal wave. She was really gone. Jacob found me sitting on the edge of the bed that evening, the letter clutched in my hands. He didn't ask, didn't need to. The look on my face told him everything. He sat beside me, his presence warm but distant. You still miss her? I nodded, unable to speak. He let out a slow breath, his shoulders sagging. I don't know if we can come back from this. I turned to him, panic flaring in my chest. Jacob, please. I'm not leaving, he interrupted, his voice steady but weary. I don't know how to trust you again. The words stung, but I couldn't blame him. I didn't know how to trust myself either. Months passed. The wounds of my choices didn't heal, not completely, but they began to scab over. Jacob and I went to therapy, awkward at first, but gradually finding a rhythm in the sessions. We talked about the affair, about the cracks in our marriage that had let Amber slip in. It wasn't easy, but it was something. I threw myself into rebuilding our life together, but Amber's presence lingered. Her laughter echoed in my mind when I least expected it. Her touch haunted my dreams. But slowly, the ache began to dull. Jacob and I weren't the same, but we were trying. And that was enough. One day, months after Amber's letter, I found myself at the cafe where we'd first met. I hadn't planned to go, but my feet had carried me there without thinking. The place looked the same, the hum of conversation and the clatter of cups unchanged. I half expected to see her at the counter, her dark hair falling into her eyes as she laughed. But she wasn't there. She wouldn't be. I sat down, ordered a coffee, and let the memories wash over me. It hurt, but it was a bittersweet kind of pain. The kind that reminded you of what you'd lost, but also of what you'd learned. As I left the cafe, I felt a strange sense of peace. Amber was gone, but the part of me she'd awakened wasn't. I carried her with me, not as a regret, but as a reminder of what it meant to feel alive. Life didn't go back to the way it was before Amber. It couldn't. But Jacob and I found a new rhythm, a new understanding of each other and ourselves. The scars of the past didn't fade completely, but they became part of our story, a reminder of the mistakes we'd made and the love we'd fought to preserve. As for Amber, she became a memory, a chapter of my life that ended too soon. I didn't know where she was or if she'd found the happiness she deserved. But I hoped she had. Because in the end, love is messy, imperfect, and often painful. But it's also worth fighting for, even when it breaks you.